Yeah.
You said your father surfed. Did you ever surf?
Yeah, I surfed. I surfed a little bit when I was younger, but I didn't live at the beach long enough consecutively to ever get good at it. It's a really hard sport. Later, if you read the book, there is a kind of, I do get better at lake sports as time goes on, but I'm a pretty bad surfer. Maybe in my own way, I both kind of satisfy that sense of wanting to do it, but also rebelling. And I snowboard pretty proficiently, and I was doing wakeboarding for a while. So those board sports I do, but surfing I never mastered.
It's interesting.
Yeah, thanks. If I moved back to California or something, or somewhere where there was waves, I would probably do it just to
be outside.
What's that?
Just to be outside.
Yeah, I have spent a lot of time, I've done a lot of body surfing and bodyboarding and stuff, but just being out in the ocean is pretty great. Yeah.
When did you get bit with the writing bug?
I was writing pretty early. I was kind of telling stories to myself as a little kid, but when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, which I alluded to real briefly here, not something I brag about that often, I really, it's such an imaginative game, you have to create it yourself, and there's something called being a dungeon master, and that means you're the one that comes up with the adventure. And we would take turns being dungeon master, and I was not good at it because my adventures were so elaborate and persnickety that the characters would never do what I wanted them to do. But that was some of the first writing, and then in high school I was doing some writing. I wrote a play and some short stories and stuff, and then some fantasy pieces later. Finally, when I went to college, there was a creative writing class, and that's the first time I was introduced to literary writing and the possibility that I could do that kind of writing. And also it was the first time that I had an audience for my writing, just the other people in class. And I realized that, at least in that small class, that I was probably just gauging the reaction of the other students and the teacher in subtle ways. You can tell these things, that I was probably in the upper 10% of just people liking my work. So I guess I always wanted to tell stories, but that's when I finally thought, well, maybe I could actually do this. Yeah?
Kelly, did you find it pretty natural where to start and end this book? I mean, wrapping up kind of when you go to grad school, I mean, was there thoughts of continuing beyond that?
The ending, I think, was pretty natural. The epilogue, well, the beginning was the hard part. In one draft, I began when my parents first met. And there's a famous kind of novel, it's a fake memoir, Tristram Shandy, and it's a memoir and it takes place when he's like a sperm. Anyway, so yeah, it was hard to figure it out. And it really was writing it all out in kind of a sloppy way and then just figuring out all the parts and then looking for patterns. And it really did seem like the father angle of the story, which obviously is not the only aspect of my life, but that was the one that seemed to have the most dramatic potential and that I think marked me as somebody different. Gerald Stern, a great poet who was a River Reader a couple of years ago, casually mentioned when he was doing his talk at the Q&A that there's always a moment when a writer becomes a writer. And for him, I think it was his sister died or something, like some tragic. And I'm like, wow. And I kind of wonder, maybe that goes back to Jane's question, that this moment where I was knocked out of my own sense of my own adolescent problems by this big problem that my father had gotten himself into and created for all kinds of people. That may have been a start of me starting to fictionalize myself in a way. And so that became the plot in a way. And then everything else had to be hung off that main storyline. But yeah, it took a while.
This might be a bit related to the question he asked about the conclusion. One of the things that I think one might find very interesting about the text and your reading of it is that you seem to be very successful in building a certain amount of suspense and wonderment as to what is going to come next, and it's almost building some intrigues along the way so that the reader is always looking out to know what is coming next. Now, the last passage that you read, for quite a while I was trying to follow and figure out what was actually going on. Are there some parts where you think you almost want to sort of not confuse the reader, but kind of knock them about and let them wonder what's going on, to keep on wanting to know what is following? Is there a deliberate, or maybe not intentional, but some sort of not going a straight and straightforward way and letting people figure things out and wonder?
I can't say that it was intentional, but I was aware of it. I was just working with the material I had. As far as it having suspense, and I have heard that from a few people that they wanted to know, and that kind of surprised me, because at no point in the reading did I ever wonder what was going to happen next. So it's hard to know that other people will be interested, and all I can guess is that maybe my many years of writing fiction and struggling with it, and just the technique just kind of found its way into this true story. As far as the book was described as picaresque by one reviewer at least, and I don't know that she necessarily meant it as a compliment, but Don Quixote is the ultimate picaresque novel, and if you think about it, it doesn't have an arc in the way that current fiction does. It's just this crazy guy goes out, this crazy thing happens, he goes for a while, another crazy thing happens, and it just keeps going and going. My life has really followed that line, and then the father storyline was my attempt to impose a more recognizable plot into what has been essentially the chaos of my life. Chaos may be a strong word, and that's kind of what we do with writing anyway, is we take the stuff of life, which doesn't seem to have a form, and try to put a form into it. But it definitely wanders, and I think some people really appreciate that, and some people think of it as a flaw. And for me, it's just, I probably would have made it a little bit more, I don't know, cohesive as a plot, I suppose, if I could have, but I actually was stretching it a little bit just to get it as cohesive as it is, just because of the way, the facts that I wasn't allowed, because I decided to write it as nonfiction.
Thank you.
For you, what was the significance of discovering the Kalia mythology while you were in graduate school?
The question is about Kalia mythology. At the second to last chapter takes place in Atlanta, and I grew up in a place called Anza several years. This desert area of, I think the population of it as a town was like 150 or something at that time, and it was just a bunch of hippies and runaways and kind of gun collecting survivalist types and nudists, and there was a gay couple and that people were escaping, and I lived there it was a really magical place. It's that high desert that has the big house-sized rock boulders all over, and then all kinds of cactus. it's a really important part. Like every time I think back, that's the magical place of my youth, even more so than the beach. I love the beach more than the desert, but the desert is the one that captures my imagination. And when I was in Atlanta, I decided to start looking up the Kalia Indians that live next to our property, or we live next to their reservation. That's kind of a Freudian slip there, as if, oh, well, they moved in next door. And I studied them to a certain extent as I was in graduate school, and I discovered that these myths that I'd been told by my father and by my uncle, that they were just local myths about this big mountain that was overlooking the thing. It was called Takowitz Peak, and Takowitz was supposed to be this crazy child murderer, and I just believed him as a kid. And then it turns out he's I found all this mention of Takowitz in an anthropology journal. Many, many mentions of him. He's one of the Kalia's trickster characters. And these were recorded in probably like 1920 or something, these ethnographies. And probably the stories were, I have no idea how old they are. But it was just really gratifying and, almost overwhelming to think that my little story that I heard and this guy that I was afraid of actually was a story that was told for hundreds and hundreds of years for the same reason, to scare little kids or to be the person that you're not supposed to. And I read all these different manifestations of him as a culture hero, you know. So the fact of the matter is that in Atlanta, that really was this amazing connection with home after having left California for the first time. And no, not for the first time, for the last time. I knew once I got to graduate school that, you know, I had gotten on a one-way ticket away, because I just didn't see myself getting back at that point, because I could kind of see the future a little bit. And so I suppose that was a bit of nostalgia, a little bit of wistfulness, but also a sense of wonder of this place. And of course, when I lived in Anza, moving from the beach to the desert is not a move that most kids want to make, so I thought it was terrible. I moved from the crowded ocean where all the kids had cool shoes and skateboards to this place where there were no kids at all, and I would just run around barefoot. So it was important to me, and it seemed like it fit in with the story well enough to merit inclusion.
The tone of your writing completely changed after you wrote that section.
Yeah.
It seemed like a resolution.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose it also was when I was in graduate school, you know, and I don't spend a lot of time in the book talking about the influence of college on me, because I feel like that's a story that's been told a lot, and I wanted to kind of fill in other parts of the journey, I suppose. But graduate school was, and that's why that was the end of the story, because then I just was so fundamentally on a different track at that point. And so I guess the writing probably did get a little, I was also in an MFA program, so I was getting a little more self-conscious about artfulness in writing. So I guess that also kind of makes sense to me now. Although when I talk about this and when I think about it, I'm just another critic, you know, reading my own work and trying to figure out what I was doing. I mean, I had some ideas of what I was doing, but I didn't know everything that everybody would ever think about it. And I'm hearing interesting ideas about it all the time that I probably didn't think about. Anne, did you have anything?
Well, I was going to say, as you were talking about shaping the facts of your life into a kind of form that echoed or replicated the trajectory of fiction, it's always a question in doing that genre, how much did you adjust the raw data to become a more coherent art form? Did you find yourself, you couldn't completely remember sort of saying, well, this is the way I felt, and this is the kind of way I'm going to communicate the way I felt in this, in these details. So that how much were you consulting your sort of felt truth, and how much were you being very careful to stick to what you actually remembered?
The more I revised it, the less farther away I got away from specific memory. First off, time was a problem. It would have been really convenient if I could have had all these experiences in a year. A year is a really good amount of time to write a book. That's why everybody writes those, my year, not doing this. You know what I mean? There's that whole series of books, because Walden he actually was there for 2 years, but he said, I'm just going to, for the sake of this writing, I'm going to make it 1 year. But so I had to just kind of work with what I had, and yeah, I definitely, all the stuff that I read, the check, the pattern on the bed in the timeshare, of course I couldn't remember exactly what, I mean, I don't have a photographic memory, and I certainly hope the book doesn't suggest that every single textual detail is just straight from this kind of recording of my life that I somehow have access to. But I did go to a timeshare thing that was horrible, and there was 2 guys, I don't remember their names. One of them played for the Dallas Cowboys and he was the big bully that came in at the end. The other guy was the setup guy, and he was pissed off to be there. And so you can, just by that's the bare bones of what happened. The emotional thing was real. I didn't like it. So I guess that's where I was never dishonest about emotions or about what happened. As far as the details, I figured it was a children's coloring book, and the outline is what I get to work with, but I get to choose whatever color I want to put in there, because no one's really to know. My understanding is there probably are some sticklers who might fault me for that and taking too many liberties, but I think generally it's understood that the term creative put on nonfiction is basically a declaration that this is the technique I'm going to use.
And that you get to make those adjustments according to like, truth to your feelings, as opposed to truth to what would be a kind of complete recollection.
The timeline was very, very tricky, and I can't vouch for getting everything in the exact order in which it happened or what year it happened and stuff like that, because I just have a bad memory about when things happened in the order. I tried my best. Yeah. Anybody else? It's a lot of questions, so I'm not feeling neglected. Oh yeah, hey.
Why do you think Felix the cat became your demon?
That was really a mystery. He's still there. He looks pretty demonic even now, to be honest. I don't know, it was just
something like with your childhood and just kind of...
I watched Felix the Cat cartoons a lot when I was in Anza. We had a crappy TV, and I remember Felix the Cat was one of the main cartoons. I liked him, but I was never afraid of him as a kid. I just think that it was, I don't know that there could ever be an answer to why that particular.
Was demonic.
What's that?
You thought that bag was possessed by something, huh? You didn't
Well,
know what
yeah.
that bag could turn into. It could have been something deadly or something.
Felix the Cat had a magic bag from which he could produce anything. His magic bag of tricks. When I was a kid, I was definitely on Felix's side.
You didn't realize that that's
I've never thought of that, but Felix's enemy was the professor. So that's a brilliant reading.
cool when the kid got out of class and had an excuse for late work or something. My bag ate my paper. I don't know.
He would be yeah, totally. Thanks for that. If that's it.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a lot.